Kevin Stone is the long-serving and founding executive officer of VALID, Victoria's peak advocacy organisation for people with intellectual disability and their families, and he's also the current president of Inclusion Australia, NCID. He is the parent of 4 adult children, 3 of whom have disabilities. He is closely involved in all levels of NDIS implementation as the parent of a participant, as an advocate for many NDIS participants, and as a trainer to NDIA planning facilitators and local area coordinators. Thank you, Kevin. So Kevin, I wanted to start off with asking you, can you tell us about an example of great customer service that you've experienced in disability or in the NDIS in general?
Look, as an advocacy organisation, we tend to see a lot of the problems in the sector, and there are many problems and concerns. But I'm also constantly delighted by some of the wonderful things we see happening out there in people's lives. For me, personally, I see it constantly in my son's life. He happens to be surrounded by people who really get him and understand him. And a good example, just recent, over the weekend, if you like, is my son Damien usually comes home on Sundays. He has for a long time, and that's become sort of part of the ritual. On Saturday, I got a phone call from a rather nervous staff member saying, "Hey, listen, Damien's saying he doesn't want to come home tomorrow. Is that okay?" I said, "Yeah, is there a reason for that? Why?" And she said, "Well, he's just gone out and bought himself a new TV, and we'd like to help him paint his room tomorrow, and he's really keen to." I said, "Well, that's just fantastic." And Damien's in the background. Damien's not able to express it in that way, but it was very clear that that's what he wanted to do. So the first thing I'd say about that is, for me, that's a great example of a staff member naturally getting that it's about Damien, what his wishes are, not about what the parent might want. I know there's a part of me as a dad that might feel a little bit miffed in there. Oh, gee, hang on, Sunday's my day with him. So it actually took a bit of courage for that staff member to actually stand up for my son and say, "Hey, this is what he wants." And I happen to be such a wonderful dad, I get it, you see. The next day, the great example of customer service, if you like, was all throughout the day I kept getting photographs on my phone of Damien actually sanding back the walls, scraping away, and then rolling the paint, and then the finished product. They didn't need to do that. They just naturally, they understand that Damien's family is a big part of his life, and they got the priority right. What Damien wants comes first, but his family is a big part of that.
That's great, Kevin. Can you tell us about, in your experience of the trial sites, which organisations are connecting best with clients or consumers?
Yes, look, I won't name particular organisations. It's more a type of organisation that I want to suggest to you. We think are doing better and are going to do better. And I guess the services that understand that it is about meeting the aspirations and the needs of individuals with disability, not just providing things that have been traditionally provided, bowling on a certain day, this on a certain day, and people have to sort of fit into that, but really getting that they need to understand the individuals that they are pitching their service to. So that on the one hand. On the other, understanding that families, particularly in the lives of people with disability, are a big part of their lives, and they need to be able to assure families that the services are reliable, they are secure, they are safe. Not to the ridiculous extent of being that's all they are, but getting the balance right between providing challenge and risk and opportunity for people to get out there and grow, but doing it in a way that actually assures families that things are being done properly and that they're not going to be sort of left exposed out there. So getting that balance right. And the only services that I see really who get that are services that have got really good, strong, person-centred planning practices, because it's that practice or the process of sitting down with the person and with their family, getting to know them, getting the balance right for each individual. Services which understand the importance of that are doing better and will do better, because that process makes sure they're adjusting to the needs of the individual.
That's great. Kevin, when families are going to get information about services and which organisations to choose, do you know where they go? What's the typical places they seek their information from?
Yeah, a lot of that stuff happens, at the school leaving stage, where families are talking amongst themselves and looking around for information. And typically families talk to each other.
Yeah.
They typically, that's how it happens. And people with disability, particularly people with intellectual disability, don't tend to talk to each other so much, if at all, about the services that are available to them or what might be quality. So a lot of that stuff is guided by families. Associations for families, particularly in, say, Victoria, organisations like the Association for Children, Carers Victoria, and Valid, our own organisation. They're places where parents, family members come together and talk about stuff, and they talk about the quality of services. Valid, for instance, we run a number of support groups, peer support groups, where people with disability and family members come along and they talk with each other about who's offering the best deal, who's offering the best quality, who's the most reliable. You could say that government departments and NDIA put out information, etc. What I would say is that's not useless. I'm sure it's helpful, but the most important, most valuable way of getting information is from trusted sources, being other family members.
That's great. And with intellectual disability, you touched on clients not talking much, or people with intellectual disabilities not talking a lot, but just who is the client in the NDIS? If a person has an intellectual disability or cognitive impairment, who do you reckon is the client?
Well, the focus must always be the person with intellectual disability.
Mm-hmm.
And an understanding of that person, of their needs, their goals and aspirations, to the extent that can be known, is absolutely paramount. But the truth is that's often supported and even defined by the family, by parents, and parents are often the ones who are sitting there helping the person to express, or indeed often expressing on their behalf, those sorts of goals and interests. So families are a big part of the client group. Services need to understand that they need to be pitching this stuff to meet the needs of the individual with disability, but they need to be talking with and communicating with families about how that's actually done, because families are often, the expert. The other client group, and they'll probably deny that they're a client group in this, but the funder itself, whether they like it or not, services are pitching to and do need to pitch to the NDIA in terms of being able to say that they are meeting the NDIS principles. They are applying the values and principles of the National Disability Strategy, because when it comes down to it, NDIA that does have a role in saying, these services are purchasable or they're not purchasable, and quite frankly, I think that's appropriate. There's a lot of crap out there that some families and some people with disability might be tempted into purchasing. There's a lot of wacky stuff out there, so I'm quite comfortable with the fact that the NDIS must be one of the groups here that needs to be satisfied that the services are reliable and of a high quality.
That's great, Ken. The final question I'd like to ask you is, what types of organisations do you think are going to succeed in the long run, from your early experiences of the trial sites and from your extensive experience in disability? Who do you reckon is still going to be here in 10 years' time, or the ones that are going to be doing best in 10 years' time?
Well, I think you've got to start with the services that are best meeting the needs of people with disability with the support of families. That's absolutely critical. But I think the other dimension to this, the most critical dimension, is those services which best manage their staff and which best motivate and mobilise their staff and best empower their staff. These are the organisations that are going to thrive. The organisations which don't empower their own staff to take control of within their sphere, to give them creative opportunities, to give them support, to give them a sense of ownership and accomplishment in their career. If services aren't giving that to the staff don't stay, and the reliability is gone from the service, and the relationships that people with disability need from staff don't appear. So I look around at some organisations and I think, you won't be here in 10 years' time. If you treat your staff like this, then this is exactly how you're going to treat my son. I don't want you. We need staff. We need in our sons and daughters' lives staff who value them, who empower them. You do not get staff valuing other people and empowering other people if they themselves are made to feel like shit. You know, if they are demoralised, if they don't want to come to work, if they're just showing up because of the dollars rather than because of the vocation and the commitment, then we don't want them. You know, so services that really grasp the idea of managing staff to get the best out of them, knowing that those staff are going to be most capable of getting the best out of our sons and daughters. They're good organisations.